Welcome to the Undiscovered Gems podcast, hosted by NBA legend and business powerhouse Charles D. Smith, highlighting today's best and brightest business minds.
Hi, and welcome back to the show, Undiscovered Gems. My name is Charles D. Smith. I am a former NBA player and the host of the show, and today we have the Professional of the Year, Miss Carol.sigmond. She's a lawyer. She's practiced for 40 years. Yes, 40 years. That's a pretty long time and a lot of experience. She's also an attorney and a former bar president of the New York County Law Association. We'll talk a little bit about that. And she does pro bono work, and it's about access to justice. Carol, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you, and thank you for having me.
Oh, glad you're here. And we have a loaded show today, I can tell, because our topic and our content here is the rule is not a bipartisan issue. And what is that rule? The rule of law. Is that correct, Carol? The rule of law right. is not a partisan issue. And we're going to unpack that and hop into that subject matter. So first, Carol, how did you become a lawyer? And then we're going to get into the subject matter. But first, tell us, why a lawyer? You probably could have done a lot of things in your life. Why law?
So don't laugh. It's a true story, but it's a funny one. So I went to Grinnell College, which is something of a graduate school, mill. I mean, they send a lot of people to graduate school. And I thought I wanted to be a demographer, a pollster. So I show up for my first meeting with my new advisor as a senior, and I tell him that I think I want to apply to Princeton's demography program. He says, oh, no. You need to go to law school. We've all discussed it. You're the only one that's going to like it. So I said, that's interesting. He said, you're going to hate academia. Don't go to academia. Go to law school. So I said, okay. So I applied to law school, got in. A lot of my classmates also applied to law school. I had more fun than anybody else. So they were right.
Well, for some reason, just from the start of getting to know you, you enjoy your work. It's definitely your purpose and you have fun doing it.
Yes.
So let's hop into the subject matter. What's happening with our country? What is going on? Why you would say the rule of law is not a partisan issue?
So there's a great deal of unsettling things happening, the tariffs being just one of them. But the immigration program that the president is following and his heavy use of executive orders. And these uses of executive orders have generated at least 190 lawsuits so far. Think about that. I don't think there were 190 lawsuits against any administration in a 3-month period the way there has been here. So it's a lot of litigation. And it breaks down into a number of areas, some of which people might view as partisan, the DOGE activity to reduce the size of government, or the president's effort to try to deport more people. All of them really involve the rule of law. But for me, the issue that is demonstrating how unpartisan this issue is and how universally the desire is for people for the president and his administration to comply with the law is the tariff area. So in the last couple of weeks, there have been 4 lawsuits filed relating to tariffs. One was filed by lawyers who are part of the Federalist Society, very conservative. One was filed by a group of lawyers who are center right. One was filed by lawyers who I would think of as center left, and one was filed by the Attorney General of California. What's remarkable about these 4 suits is they all plead exactly the same thing. Different words. They classify it differently. They look for slightly different relief, but they were all making 2 points. The president has exceeded his executive authority in making a declaration under the IEEPA of an emergency. and he has exceeded his authority in the remedy that he has selected, and he has usurped the power of Congress to levy and fix taxes. They're all saying the same thing. One filed in Montana, one is filed in the Northern District of Florida, one is filed in California, and one is filed right here in New York City in the Court of International Trade. But when you get 4 groups of lawyers from all over the country looking at the same issue and coming to the same basic conclusion that this is what we're looking at, then you know this isn't partisan. This is about the rule of law. And it's about what the president is empowered to do, what he's not empowered to do, and the obligation of the courts to articulate the law and the duty of the president to follow the law.
So as someone who is a novice to this, a lot of the subject matter, speaking for the audience, Carol, how do you know about all these lawsuits? Talk about your law firm and the prowess of your law firm to be kind of engaged in on the forefront of information on these matters.
Well, I have been called an information junkie from time to time. So let's just face the fact that I look at this. There are a couple of websites, one called justsecurity.org, the other is the AP Newsroom, that are tracking all the litigation against the Trump administration. And I visit those websites from time to time to take a look and see what cases have been filed. And that's how I was struck by these 4 trade cases and how different the lawyers and law firms are, how different the plaintiffs are, and how different their businesses are, and how their lawyers have all reached for the same arguments and the same issues.
Sure.
And I thought that was important. So I have been following these issues because I care about the rule of law. I think the rule of law and the Constitution are the foundation of our society. And without it, we are not the United States of America anymore. We must have, everyone must follow the law, not just you, not just me, everyone.
Sure. Let's hop into some of the subject matter on which the statements are being made. Let's talk about tariffs. There's a lot of information being reported. Some people don't know what's true, what's not true. We obviously have the term fake news. Give the audience an understanding of what it is that is taking place with the terrorists that's causing such a uprise in the people and the economics of it.
I can touch on both. So let me start with what's actually happened. The president has used what he believes is his authority under the International Economic Emergency Powers Act, the IEEPA, to declare a national emergency. The national emergency that he declared was the fentanyl emergency. All of this is based on fentanyl. And the argument is that the components of fentanyl are being manufactured in mainland China. They are being transshipped mostly to Mexico and assembled there into the fentanyl drug and then smuggled into the United States. So that is the national emergency that was declared.
Mm-hmm.
The first problem is, if that's your national emergency, how do you justify including Canada? Because there's no evidence that fentanyl is being manufactured in Canada or shipped into the United States from Canada. Problem 1. Number 2, if you read the statute, the IEEPA, you will see that it was an effort by Congress not to expand the power of the president, but to reduce his power, which he had under a previous statute called the Trading with the Enemy Act from 1917.
Mm-hmm.
So in 1977, they repealed the Trading with the Enemy Act, they replace it with the IEEPA, and they restrict the president's powers. Now, what's an appropriate use of it? Well, one use was made by President Biden, when he declared an emergency when the Russians invaded Ukraine. And he used his authority to block the Russians from being in the SWIFT system, which is the international banking system. So that was a more or less appropriate national emergency and an appropriate remedy. Tariffs are not a remedy listed under the IEEPA. There's nowhere where the president can impose a tariff as part of the penalty. He can cut people off, he can embargo things, he can direct a treasury to begin court proceedings to seize assets. There are things he can do, yes, but he cannot levy a tariff. That is not one of the remedies. And that is a point made in all four of these lawsuits. All of them point out that tariffs are a tax. All taxes must begin in the House of Representatives, and all taxes must be levied by Congress. The president can only collect taxes as authorized by Congress. There's no congressional authorization for any of these levies. And there's no statutory authority either. So this is where the problem begins. But let me point out, there's even a challenge in these lawsuits to the president's declaration of an emergency, because fentanyl only would entail maybe mainland China, because the Mexicans have been interdicting the fentanyl for a number of months now. The other problem is that he also made an emergency declaration that the trade surplus that certain countries have with us was also a national emergency. That's not a national emergency as identified in the IEEPA, and tariffs are not a power that the president has. So this is at the heart of the problem, that there needs to be a legal basis for what the president is doing, and these four lawsuits are challenging that basis.
Carol, what do you think the process would be to start in having some sort of middle ground, some solutions? Because as you've stated, this is a problem. Lawsuits are being drawn up or have been drawn up. How do you see a solution? What do you see as a process of better dealing with these tariffs with other countries in the United States?
Well, if we want to focus on the international trade situation, we need to have a very clear understanding of international trade. And there's a lot of discussion about how there's a trade surplus running against the United States in the area of goods and manufacturing. What's not talked about as much is that there is a massive trade surplus in favor of the United States in services and technology. So what's happened to the US economy over the last 50 years is we have been evolving away from a manufacturing into a service economy. I don't think that's stopping. I think that's going to continue. Look at us here. We're doing this interview together. People can see us, they can hear what we say, but we don't need to be in the same room. We don't need to travel to be together. We don't need an elaborate studio anymore. We can just do this remotely.
Right.
But that's the service piece of the economy versus the manufacturing piece of the economy. That's changed. And so a better understanding of how our economy works is a very important starting place. The second thing is to say, okay, if we do want to onshore manufacturing, let's do it in a targeted way. Let's not take essentially a fully integrated continental economy, which is what we have with Canada and Mexico on cars, and disrupt it. How does that help everybody? And if you read these lawsuits from these four small groups, you will see that all of them their businesses are completely dependent on what they import from China, Canada, or wherever.
Mm-hmm.
And that disrupts the economy, and it could disrupt drugs, it could disrupt medications, it could disrupt the car economy is going to be disrupted. Michigan is already seeing problems. But it requires a real thoughtful process about what you're really trying to achieve. And can you turn the clock back and make the U.S. a manufacturing economy when, in fact, all the drivers are to service economy? And let me give you the big elephant in the room: artificial intelligence, robotics. It isn't, even if you brought car manufacturing back to the United States, it's not coming back the way it was 40 years ago. It's coming back with robotics and artificial intelligence.
Right. Right.
And you and I both touch on construction and building. Robotics are coming. Artificial intelligence is here. It's changed.
Absolutely. Yeah. Carol, what do you think the president's motives are? What is the benefit to the United States? What do you think the benefit is to the United States based on what these actions are? And do you see things getting better?
So I believe the president thinks that onshoring manufacturing is somehow in our national interest. And there's an argument that onshoring some things and making sure that we can always produce what we need to for national defense, weapons, planes, tanks, but that's been done. I mean, that's part of what's already happening. But it may also be, I mean, we have a president who comes out of the construction industry. He thinks in terms of things and physical structures, not be thinking in terms of, AI and services. And he may not, I mean, because who does the pushback coming from within the administration? It's coming from Elon Musk, who is technology, AI, and services.
Sure.
So I think it's probably well-intentioned. It may not be as well thought out as it could have been. I also think there is an issue that we really have to face. As we become more technological, as we become more AI oriented, the job market's going to shift too. There's going to be more jobs for people who can play with computers and think that way. Fewer, repetitive physical jobs. And it may be that we have to rethink our economy to make sure that everyone is able to contribute. And we may have to think through our education system and think through, job training and think through how to positively engage with the new economy rather than try to resist it.
Good points. Let's talk about immigration. So you mentioned Canada. There was a article and some information looming about a Canadian celebrity that got held up in immigration here for quite some time, and it was went through a tough situation, and that kind of, because it was a celebrity, it brought a lot of attention to what's happening with immigration here in the U.S. How does Canada get roped into all of this, number one, and what do you think about the immigration policies?
Okay, so Canada doesn't belong in this discussion. We have one of the longest peaceful borders in the world for over 100 years with the Canadians. It's just not a source of problems. Canadians and Americans have been passing back and forth. People have been coming and going. There are economies along the northern border of the United States and the southern border of Canada that are completely integrated. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. So, and we haven't had large numbers of undocumented workers entering the country from Canada. So it doesn't make sense. The overall immigration situation is much more complicated, and I'll offer some things to consider. 1 in 4 construction workers in the United States is an undocumented worker. We have many undocumented workers in many blue-collar jobs.
Sure.
That is a reality. We need to think about that. We have families that some are undocumented, some are American citizens, very complicated. We have had periods of time when we've had almost crisis level immigration, as we did, 2019, 2020. That period was very tough. And Americans are of two minds. Some do not want people here unless they come legally. Others have this great feeling of compassion for people who are fleeing economic and other hardships. My own view is that we've made a serious mistake in not investing more in El Salvador, Venezuela, and other countries where people are feeling compelled to leave. We haven't helped them to find lives in their own countries. And that was something we used to do, we aren't doing now. And that may not be wise on our part. But if you really want to step back and think about this is climate change. People are on the move. They're on the move from Africa into Europe. They're on the move from Latin America into North America. Climate change is driving a lot of this. And this means that we need to be thinking about how to help everyone in the world, to find their place in their own homelands and not feel the need that they have to take these horrible risks, whether trying to cross the Mediterranean Sea or traverse these rough terrains in Mexico. I mean, climate change that we need to be looking at hard.
And as you talk about climate change, clearly, as a matter of fact, there's a conference, I just heard there's a conference coming up in Europe, and Al Gore will be speaking. And I'm sure he's been speaking a lot. We may not see it publicly, but he was one of the people early on who's noted for talking about climate change. 20, 30 years later, the things he said were correct. When you talk about climate change, and I'm going to take it from more of an international approach, you got places, you mentioned Africa. Africa is not a part of that conversation. Africa has sun. They don't need solar necessarily for renewable energy, yes, but when you talk about icebergs melting, Africa has nothing to do with that. Climate change is for everyone globally, but we're just not seeing everyone at the table globally, and we're seeing a small group or a group addressing for all, and they may not have all of the proper information to do that. Have you seen any progress based on an integrated solution and process with all parties involved for climate change? Everyone needs to be represented because it's a global problem.
It's been a work in progress. Okay, there have been efforts to try to have bigger groups address climate change, smaller groups address climate change. You've had different international conferences. I mean, former Mayor Bloomberg has been in the forefront of trying to advocate for better science and better studies, better understanding of climate change. I think there are a couple of really tough realities to consider. If you look at energy use and its petroleum products that produce the side effect of warming the earth, It's the northern hemisphere that uses the most, not the southern hemisphere. It's the more developed economies that use the most. So you have Europe and the United States and China, Japan, Korea, Australia, having to really look at these issues. And then you have certain kinds of tensions, some that the president has talked about, which is, why is it that all of the cost and all of the burden from climate change keeps falling onto the United States? Well, we're one of the biggest users of climate, and we're one of the wealthiest countries in the world. And we have very fine science. So there's a reason why people are looking to us for leadership. And we probably ought to seize it. But we can't be at the table alone. Everyone has to be there. And the major developing countries like India, Brazil, Russia, they all need to be at the table. Everyone needs to see it as their problem, and everyone needs to participate in the solution.
Yeah, this is just a random question based on an observation from me. If we can do best practices for venture capital worldwide, and Europe participates, and everybody is who's doing it the best, and it spreads worldwide, we can do nonprofit best practices for a lot of different things. Why can we not do best practices for climate change? It just seems there's something wrong there. It's almost like some people don't want to do it, but we do it globally for so many different things. Where are we missing the opportunity on climate change to work together?
I think some of it has to do with certain countries have different interests in terms of climate and petroleum. You have the Middle East, Venezuela, frankly, the United States and Canada that produce some of this energy. The Russians produce some of this energy, so there are different economic tensions, and there is yet to be a really full understanding and appreciation of the impact of petroleum and what needs to be done to replace petroleum. And let me tell you something, that's not easy to do. Once again, drawing on our shared experience in the construction area, everything has petroleum in it. It's just a common denominator in construction. There's a lot we can do. We can recycle concrete. We can change to solar energy for generators. But the bottom line is we still need petroleum. We just need to manage it better.
Right. And that's what I'm getting at. Why not best practices for that and just talk about it? But, Carol, there's obviously you have a ton of knowledge and a ton of experience in these matters. What would you want the audience to go away with having this earnest conversation?
I would like everyone to focus on the most important issue that I think is facing we here in the United States, which is ensuring that we are all complying with the law, from the most powerful person in the country, the president, down to you and I and everybody on the street. We all need to take responsibility. We need to abide by the rule of law, and we need to hold our leadership accountable. If we do that, it will allow us to have a more civil dialogue and a more rational dialogue on the other big issues facing us, like immigration, like climate change. If we want to have civil discourse, we need to come together with a common core of values, and that common core of values for Americans is the law.
Well, Carol, this has been an honor to talk to you. The show is called Undiscovered Gems, and you definitely dropped quite a few of them today on the audience. Very informative. Would love to talk to you again sometime. And thank you for being on the show, and thank you for providing your wisdom and opening up the dialogue on these subjects with regards to the United States. So thank you for being on the show, Carol.
Well, thank you for having me. I had a lovely time, and if you ever want me back, let me know.
All right. Our professional of the year, Carol.sigmond. Thank you for your time. I hope you enjoyed the episode of Undiscovered Gems and look to see you again in the future. Take care. This is Charles Smith, and I'm signing off.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Undiscovered Gems with our host, Charles D. Smith, highlighting today's best and brightest business minds. Brought to you by Pods Entertainment Group.